Hello, let's discuss this question. Question number 4. Alan uses two 1D arrays, userList and user password list, right? For 20 users, he stores each user ID in userList and the corresponding password in password list. For example, the person with the ID Fred12 has a password T456. That's simply right. You have two 1D arrays, right? So this is one-dimensional array. Is another one-dimensional array, right? And this is the index, and this is the index we have in this password list. So the corresponding index of each list has the username and the password. So Matt's username is this, password is this, right? Fred's username is here, and the corresponding password is here, and it's the same index in both arrays, right? So try to understand how we are going to implement this, right? Alan wants to write an algorithm to check whether the user ID and the password entered by the user are correct. He designs the algorithm to search user list for the user ID. So what we are going to do is we are going to search for the user ID first, and the user will enter the username, and then we'll search for the username and for the user ID. If the user ID is found, the password stored in password list is to be compared to the entered password. Then what we do is we take the index. If we find the user ID, we take the index of that, and then we look at the corresponding index of the password list to see whether that's the password. If the password match, the login is successful. In all other cases, login is unsuccessful. Yeah, it's really easy. It's a login system, right? Okay, now here user, this is an identifier table. Basically what we do here is we assign, we come up with the names that we use for variables, and here's the explanation, right? So user list 1 to 20 is the first array for user list. So then this should be password list, okay, for the password array. So it's going to be like this. This is going to be password list. Use the exact name with the exact case, right? And the length is 1 to 20. Okay, max index is number of elements in each array. That's correct. That's the total length. My user ID entered to login. My password is going to be the password password to be entered, right? Alright, because we need to check the password, cross-check the password. So this will hold the password, my user ID, just like my user ID. This will hold the password to login or check, right? User ID found, that's false. This is actually a flag value which is going to store one of two values, either true or false. If it is false if the user ID not found. Now if the user ID is not found, then we don't need to check any password or anything, right? That means the user is not there. If the user ID is found, only we check the password, right? So false if the user ID is not found in user list. True if user ID is found. User ID found. loginOK. Now that's another flag value. loginOK, which can have two values. It's false if now we have found. Now okay, let's assume that we have found the user ID, right? And loginOK will be false if the password does not match, right? Because Once the user ID is found, we check the password. Now the password can be true or false. If the password is false, means login failed. If the password is true, then the login is successful. Right. So login is okay. loginOK. False. If no, actually we are changing the state of loginOK, so this has to be login will be okay if password match. Password match. Only the login. Oh, sorry. Password does not match. Password not match or mismatch. Password not match, it will be false. loginOK will be true if password match. Index is the positional value of each array, so pointer to current array element. So right, welcome back. Now this is part B, right? Now this is the algorithm that we have to use for the previous question, and let's see how we can fill this, right? Okay, now it's very important that you understand each line of code. Max index is 20. That's obvious. That's the total number of elements that we are going to have. Be quiet. Input my user ID. Yeah, so the user enters the user ID. Input my password. User enters the password. User ID is user ID found is false at the beginning, because before we start the program we haven't found the user. loginOK, what will happen to loginOK? We haven't still found the user, we haven't checked the password, so loginOK should be false also. Right, index is 0. That's because we are starting with 0. Index 0, because the array starts with index 0 by default. Okay, but don't forget that we have assigned maxIndex as 20. So in fact it should go from 1 to 20. Right, now the repeat until, right? Repeat until, this is the loop where we are going to use to check each element in the first array where we have the user IDs until we find the user ID correctly. We might find or we might not find, right? Okay, now first what they have done is index equals, right? So it's obvious what they're going to do. They're not going to start with 0, they are going to start with 1. Therefore this has to be index 1 to 20. Index equals index plus 1. But don't forget to write the exact case, otherwise it will be a different variable name. If userList, so we are going to check the first element first. So if userList, it should be index. Index is going to have the position. If userIndex equals, okay, that's the first value, first user ID. We are going to check it with what user has entered. So that is my user ID. Right, if user list index equals my user ID, then user ID found is true. Fine, now we have found the user ID. Right, so this has to be continued until two conditions are met. Right, what are the two conditions? Right, so this has to be carried out until we satisfy two conditions, right? So either we should have checked the whole list, or we should stop when we find the user ID. Right, when you find the user ID, we should stop, or else we should continue until the whole list is checked, right? So until this should be until user ID is found equals true. That means once the user ID is found, you should stop, or else, or index equals that means we have checked the whole list, right? That means we need to go up to max index. So index equals max index, which means we have checked the whole list. So if either of these conditions is satisfied, we should stop the loop, right? Okay, the next one, let's assume that we have checked, right? We have found the user ID. If user ID found is true, then we need to check the password, the corresponding password, right? So password list, that is the second list, and now the index is going to be, now let's suppose we have the user ID in the first position of the user ID list, and the index is 1. So the corresponding positional value means the password list should be the password of this guy, right? So if password list is index, so it is the same index that we use, equals, now the password is held as myPassword, equals myPassword, right? So now if the password is correct, we have found the username, and if the password corresponding is correct, then loginOK is true. loginOK is true. Okay, right? So if condition is here, so this has to be the end if of this, end if of this, right? So if password equals password, the end if belongs to this if, right? This end if belongs to the first if condition, right? And finally, if the login is okay, we have to produce a message saying login successful. So this has to be if login, the flag, right? If login okay equals true, then output login successful, else output user ID or password incorrect. Simple as that, right? So hope you understood, and it's really easy. And in the next one, okay, welcome back, and here's the implementation of the program, the Python program, right? So let me explain this, and here's the description. I'm defining of both the arrays, and here we are taking the total length of userList, which is going to be 3. My maxIndex is going to be 3, and userFound is false, loginOK is false, index is 0, and since we are going to use while, because we don't have repeat until, we need to implement this in a different way, right? So in repeat until, remember we had repeat until the condition is true, right? But here it is while, when I have told you that while is as long as. So if we put repeat until userFound is true, here it should be while userFound is false. That means as long as userFound is false, or index not equal to maxIndex. That means index, as long as index equals to maxIndex, which is 3, right? And here I'm using this print index command just to see the current value of index, so that I can confirm whether I'm accessing the correct position. If userList index equals my UserID, userFound is true. Now I had to use break command here because otherwise even after finding the user, it will go and increment the value of index, which will cause an index out of range error. And also notice that in the previous one, in repeat until, we had the index equals index plus 1 at the beginning, because we started with the first index, but here you can't do that because we are starting with the 0th index. So this will be 0, 1, 2. Therefore I need to put this back in the order, because at the bottom, because otherwise I won't be able to access the 0th position, right? So now it starts with 0, then it becomes 1, it becomes 2, 3, like that. And now the other problem is, even at one point index will become 3, right? So here when it goes back to the while loop condition, 3 not equal to 3 is false, right? So it should exit, but it won't exit because it will still satisfy this condition, because the user is not found. Okay, and we are using the O operator. If one of these conditions is true, we get the result. So that's how the O behaves, right? So just satisfying this is not going to work, because here we say as long as user found is false. So this still satisfies. Okay, therefore it still continues, right? So that's why I have to include this one. If index equals max index, that means if 3 equals 3, then we break the loop, right? And that solved the issue, right? Okay, now see what happens. Okay, let's we are looking for a ID which is not in the list. You can see it has checked the first position, which is actually the 0th position. It has checked the first position, it has checked the second position as well. Right, so when the index becomes 2, it has checked